So last week, I had a terrible, horrible, no good day. I woke up, broke my coffee pot before I had my coffee, locked my keys in the car, and forgot to pick one of my kids up from soccer practice. We all have off days. Sometimes those take the form of an unproductive day at the office. Other times it's a tough slog at the gym, or just a modest impairment of our everyday performance of tasks that we put ourselves through day in and day out. In many instances, the explanation for that poor performance, that poor showing, is obvious. Stress about a looming deadline, a poor night's sleep, or perhaps even a fight with a loved one or a child. In other cases, however, the explanation is more elusive. My goal today is to shed some light on that mystery, at least in part. To do so, I need you to journey back with me to Berkeley, California in the mid-1990s, a time when I had more hair and less forehead, and a time when I was running 6 to 7 days a week, logging more than 1,000 miles per year. At the same time, I was a new graduate student in economics. And one of the hazards of the trade, as any of our students or alums will tell you about studying economics, is a near religious obsession with data. Those two passions of mine came together as I meticulously, and that's a generous term, logged lots and lots of details about each and every one of those runs over a multi-year period. And one does not need an advanced degree in statistics to look at that data and see immediately that there was lots of variability in my performance. Some of that might be explained by too much drinking with old friends who were visiting in town, too many caffeine-fueled hours in the computer lab, an embarrassingly public disagreement with my advisor, but many others were not explained by casual observation. And so, over the course of several years in graduate school, I built more and more complex models to try to understand what was going on with my running performance, to try to understand the variability in my running performance. And no matter what I threw into the model, I couldn't make it go away. And then it hit me. I had, at the time, been doing a lot of work on pollution, and I understood that pollution could lead to very severe health impairments, hospitalizations, heart attacks, even death. What if very modest levels of pollution could impose slight impairments on my cardiovascular or my respiratory performance, health, and therefore impact my runs? And so a research agenda was born. Not one focused on my very privately celebrated but not very publicly celebrated running career, but rather one that was focused on the ways in which low levels of pollution might affect our everyday performance and in turn, economic productivity and prosperity. It would take a lot of patience, a lot of perseverance to get the data to make this happen. More than 10 years of work, courting, in fact, the person I knew who had the data I wanted before we could write even the very first regression equation. And yet, a research agenda was born there that really came to fruition not so far where Gordon Hansen grew up, in the Central Valley of California. In the Central Valley of California, there's a farm, much like many farms around the world, in which workers are paid based on the amount of fruit they harvest on a given day. As luck would have it, this farm also had an air quality monitor right next to it. And so we were able to link daily data on pollution with daily productivity of workers to understand whether there might be some relationship between the two. Much to our surprise, we found the impacts of very small amounts of ozone pollution changes in ozone pollution well below regulatory standards in the US and in California, we found that those small perturbations in ozone pollution led to big increases in the productivity of workers. Increases that would make CEOs and HR managers blush. And I know what you're thinking, or perhaps you're thinking, I can tell you what our reviewers were thinking at the time. This is backbreaking work. It takes place outdoors in the elements. Agriculture is really, as we just heard from Jen, agriculture is really important in lots of places in the world, but when we think about economies, particularly we think about the US economy, agriculture is not the first to come to mind. What about indoor occupations? Those that are the bread and butter of developed economies like ours. The answer is yes, those impacts matter, and they matter in very profound ways. Fine particulate matter pollution, that is very fine dust, penetrates buildings. Whatever is outside is largely inside. We've looked at the impact of very low levels of fine particulate matter pollution, and we found impacts on light manufacturing and desk work. Subsequent work by others has shown those impacts manifest in all kinds of sectors, from the very prominent and well displayed performance of professional soccer players to the less prominent but equally important performance of stock traders. And the impacts are not just limited to labor. There is now a bunch of research that shows that very low levels of pollution affect our ability to think, affect our willingness to undertake risks, and even affect criminal impulsivity. It seems that no aspect of our lives is untouched by these low levels of pollution. So what can we do about it? First, I want to note that measurement is power. If we don't know, if we cannot measure this pollution, there is nothing that we can do about it. Remote sensing, the proliferation of smartphones, the Internet of Everything is allowing us to measure things at spatial and temporal scales that were unthinkable even 5 years ago. We simply have to seize the opportunity to measure more and more of this relationship. Second, I think we have to abandon old tropes about the relationship between pollution and economy. The pundits would have you believe that we either protect the environment or we grow our businesses. That's simply a false choice. The environment is an input to productivity. It's an input to prosperity, no different than any other major investment we might make to make our firms more productive. We need to view it as such. Lastly, let me take you back to where I started our adventure here, my running. It's not that when we learn about the relationship between pollution and performance, in the case of my running, it's not simply that I learned something about pollution. By learning about that relationship and being able to remove that relationship from the equation, I now have a better understanding of the relationship between sleep and running, between hydration and running. And so those impacts, that understanding of this nuanced relationship, that nuanced relationship about the air we breathe every moment of every day, helps us to understand new things around us. 500 years ago, the microscope was invented, which launched a germ theory of disease that revolutionized the way we thought about the spread of infections. At the same time, at this very moment, the insights from that revolution permeate our San Diego economy. Here on the Mesa, with all the biotech companies that are utilizing the very insights that came from that theory, to the flatlands, where they're brewing craft beer and also utilizing those insights to provide products of great value, at least to some of us. The microscopes that allow us to measure pollution with greater and greater precision and resolution as we go forward are fundamental for us to thrive in the 21st century. The opportunity is now, the potential is enormous. Thank you.